With me today is Dave Williams, who has performed in so many different markets on radio, but we're going to focus on Sacramento because that's kind of where it all started for you, right, Dave?
Yeah, it's my hometown. So I was born there and I grew up there and actually spent the first 49 years of my life there.
So your actual first station, wasn't that in Yuba City?
Yeah, my first on-air job. That's
Mhm.
the way it used to work, Alex. As you remember, it was like, if you're going to get into radio, you start off in a college station or a very small market. And then when you're ready to graduate, you get a job at a
Mhm.
medium-sized city.
Now,
And then after,
Sacramento eventually became a major market, but at the time, was Sacramento still considered like a medium
yeah,
market? Okay.
yeah, yeah. And then if you're ready for a big time, then you move on from there. And that's a process that used to take years. And in the process of taking years, you learned a lot. These days, there are a lot of people entering radio, getting their first job in major markets. I really don't understand why that happens. I kind of do, but I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it.
Has
I
to do
just
with
think that,
Craigslist.
pardon me,
Has to do with Craigslist.
maybe so. I I do think that a lot of people miss an awful lot of learning and development. It would be like taking a really good baseball player out of high school and putting him right in the big leagues. That occasionally happens, actually, but there's so much nuance to learning the art of performing radio and to learning programming and strategies and approaches and all that stuff. And you have to learn that by screwing up,
Mhm.
which we all did in minor markets. So anyway, yeah, that's the way
So
that's the
you
way it
came
used to be.
into radio in 69, 70, in the era when society was completely changing and
Yeah,
radio was right there changing with it.
right. Yeah, society was changing big time. I'm 72. I was born in 1951. My parents grew up in the 30s and 40s. Well, society was nothing like it is now. And when I got into radio, when I got interested in radio in the early 60s, well, music was changing big time. Um, we had a lot of our rhythm and blues that had never really been part of the mainstream,
Mhm.
pop radio and so
Even
forth.
before Motown.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, along came surf bands, and then here come the Beatles and the whole English invasion and everything. And we got the San Francisco sound and all of that stuff. So I grew up in the middle of all that, and it was really exciting. And radio followed along and led the way in very exciting ways.
So talk about how Croy, where you started your top 40 medium market career, and then it blossomed into major markets.
Yeah,
At Croy, the format was, I guess, run by Johnny Hyde, called Music Power.
right.
It was a little bit different than Boss Radio. Explain the difference between Boss Radio, which was pretty popular in the mid 60s through late 60s, versus Croy.
Croy was a radio station that had its roots a little bit earlier than what you're talking about. Boss Radio, which
Mhm.
was the Bill Drake format that became so big in San Francisco and Los Angeles and Boston and other cities. The main difference was that because Croy started, it was from a little bit earlier in the popular music scene. Uh, we considered ourselves a personality station. The other stations just considered themselves music stations.
Mm.
And that was the mantra for them, was more music, less talk. And that's what they gave you. And it was great. It was extremely successful.
Mhm.
But I felt really, really lucky because I was starting off in radio the way I listened to it, the way I learned it as a child. The disc jockeys. Look, I like music, but all the stations play essentially the same songs.
Mhm.
It's like, but it was the disc jockeys that made the difference. They were entertaining, they were exciting, they were funny, and that's all I wanted to do, It's all I ever wanted to do. And so I managed to work my way into Croy, which was the station I grew up listening to back in the days of the late 60s into the 70s. They
Mhm.
were there on Arden Way. They had that window that looked in from the sidewalk to where
I
the disc
remember that.
jockey was working. And I used to go out there, when I was in high school, go out there with my friends and we'd stand out there for a couple of hours, just watch the disc jockey work and got the radio turned up. And then lo and behold, I mean, it wasn't that long after I graduated, I was on the other side of that window. I was sitting there with the controls and the microphone and the records, and it was just an absolute dream come true. And I can't say enough about my time at Croy. It, with the possible exception of personal matters like marriage and childbirth, it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Now, did you have freedom? What type of freedom did you have at Croy?
Well, we had the freedom of choosing every other record. The records that we didn't choose were the current hits. They came up in various rotations depending upon how popular they were, how well they were selling, how much they were requested, and so forth. So that would be a stack of the top 10 were in a stack of 10 records. They were literally a stack of records. Next to that was another stack of records with little blue labels instead of red ones. And those were, the bubbling under kind of hits. And those didn't play as frequently as the red ones. But at Croy, what Johnny Hyde had established, as far as I know, had never been done anywhere. And I'm not sure that it ever has been since. And he had every other song was an older song, a
Okay.
rebound, we called them
Mhm.
rebounds. And it could be a song that just fell off the charts 6 months ago, or it could be something that was 10 or 15 years old. And we had the freedom to choose those within some limits, and the limits were if you were working a night shift, uh, then you were allowed to play some album cuts, some
Okay.
heavier stuff, some longer cuts,
Mhm.
and because
Were there restrictions on music at all? Like say, with you're allowed to pick these certain songs, but did you have to keep in mind a certain flow of the music?
oh, absolutely, that's part of the craft that I was talking about. Of course, that's not necessary today because today, the people that play music, it's just all programmed into the computer and they play what comes up. But we did have choices. Now, we did have restrictions too. So I couldn't just grab a Steely Dan album and play any old cut off of that I wanted.
Mm.
I had to play the approved ones.
Mhm.
So there was that limitation. But essentially, that was it.
So in a way, it was like freeform radio, but you just didn't have complete freedom. You had to play the current hits.
It gave us an opportunity to express ourselves in terms of our own musical preferences, and you could hear the difference in from one program to the next depending on who was on the air. And the fact of the matter is most of us learned very quickly that we weren't there to play records for ourselves. We do that at home. uh,
Mhm.
so you learn, you get to know your audience, and you get to follow the rules, and next thing you know, you're sitting in a number one radio station, and you're 18 years old.
That's right. Croy was number one in Sacramento 12 plus, 1968 through 1973, and you were there most of those years.
And Croy only had 1,000 watts of power during the day, 250 at night.
Mm.
Now, we had a tremendous engineer named Don Trafton. He did more with that low power and rather uh, the shaky quality of the signal. He did as much with it as the engineers at KFRC and KHJ. He made it he made it loud, louder than it should have been. Although at night you were still lucky to get into Citrus Heights at all.
Mm.
But
Yeah. It
yeah, it
didn't,
was
didn't cover the entire metro area.
no.
Yeah.
Mm. The metro pretty well. It
Mm.
covered the metro, but that's about it. Well,
Now let's talk about Candy because that was a competitor to
yeah,
Croy, and you wound up at Candy as a program director, and that was like 1974, 1975. So talk
yeah,
about that.
Yeah, Candy, KNDE, came along about 1972, I believe. And I was sitting there at Croy, and we were playing the hits, and we were number one. And I was doing a morning show by then. And oh yeah, we just thought those guys at Candy were just nuts. You know, they didn't know what they were doing, and they were actually staffed and programmed by some very, very bright people.
Hmm.
That station changed quite a bit over the next couple of years. They'd been beaten down a little bit, and the ownership decided, okay, the way we're doing this, they were kind of like, I want to make the comparison to KZAP at the time. KZAP was an all album oriented, total free form. You know, you never knew what the disc jockeys were going to say or what they were going to play. There was like little to no format at all. And there was a big audience for that. So anyway, that's what Candy was trying to do on AM. It just didn't really work out. So they finally changed back over to Top 40 and decided to take Croy on head to head. And soon after that, I returned from Los Angeles and started working the afternoon shift there because Croy didn't have anything available for me.
You were at K Earth in Los Angeles, right?
Right.
They were playing oldies at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Really old oldies, yeah, 50s stuff. And I would, it didn't do anything for me. But so at Candy, I became program director rather soon after I started there doing the afternoon show. And we made some things happen, and we managed to beat Croy for the first
is that
time in
right?
years. Yeah.
You know what strikes me is that period when you were there, and I was just a kid at the time. I was 12 years old in 1974. But that summer, Candy had its van at the California State Fair at Cal Expo,
Yeah.
and Gene Lane was. I was watching him do his show, and that's what got. But besides Casey Kasem, that's what made me want to get into radio. Was
Gene
watching
Lane.
him at the fair.
Yeah. What a goofball he is. I talked to him not that long ago, about 6 months ago or so, and he's still out there. He's still the space cowboy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He does
great.
Elvis impersonations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He made a good living at it for years. He doesn't look anything like Elvis, although he puts on the hair and all that and the suit and everything. But we had some wonderful people working at Croy. We had some really good jocks working at Candy too. It's just that station just couldn't hold its head up long enough to become entrenched in the market because it
So
was
did
old.
Croy just become ingrained in people's minds
Oh,
as
sure.
the top 40 station in Sacramento?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, oh yeah, it was. Like I said, it became generational. Um, so
Right. Multi-generational.
yeah, I left Candy after a year or two, I guess a couple of years, and that's when I was offered the opportunity to work in Memphis programming WHBQ.
Now that's where Rick Dees worked, right? It was.
Yeah, not really. Rick Dees was kicking our asses. He was working at the competitor WNPS, and
Oh,
he was doing the morning show. I actually offered him our morning show. And I offered him a huge amount of money, which my boss said, don't go above, what was it? I think $30,000 a year. It's like, oh my God, 30,000. I was making 19. And so I went over to Rick's house and I offered him 30,000. I was right off the top. The boss said I was supposed to kind of work him, don't pay any more than you need to. I just walked in and said, how about $30,000? And his eyes got like this, and he says, I'm there. I'll be there.
Was that before or after Disco Duck?
That was before.
Okay.
It was before Disco Duck. Anyway, so I got a phone call from him the next day after I told the boss, all right, we got him. He's coming. And he called me and he says, I'm sorry. He says, I feel so horrible. He said, but WMPS just doubled your offer. So, well, congratulations. That's the way it goes.
Dave, we've got so many more radio stories to tell at some point, but that's all we have time for today. And I want to talk with you about your talk radio career as well in our next interview.
Happy to do that, and talk with you whenever you like, Alex. This is really fun.